When I say from the river to the sea, I want justice from the river to the sea, not justice in a little West Bank and oppression and racism and apartheid in the rest of Palestine. I want all of Palestine to be free, not free of Jews, but free of racism, free of discrimination, free of injustice, because we've never had as much documentation as there exists now. This is the most well-documented genocide in history, the most well-documented apartheid in history, the most well-documented daily massacres, violations of basic rights in history. And yes, we do need a radical change.
Yeah.
And yes, the state of Israel as it exists today is a problem. And it's a problem for Jews as much as for Palestinians, because it calls for racism, because it calls for Jewish supremacy, because it calls for Jewish domination, because it pretends to speak for all Jews while at the same time undermining Jewish values and Jewish faith and Jewish morality, I think. And Zionism loves to conflate the two. They always say, we want to pass this legislation against hate speech and against discrimination and against anti-Zionism. They slip in anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And a lot of progressives fall in for that trap. They try to pass this IHRA definition of anti-Semitism that blatantly conflates anti-Semitism with anti-Israeli or anti-Zionist activity and beliefs, and criminalizes anti-Israeli activity.
When do we get to look at the people that are suffering under what they're doing? What do you tell people in Gaza to do at this moment? What do you tell them to do? Do they lay down and die? Or what are they supposed to do?
I think they need us on the outside to help them. We have seen millions of people march throughout Europe. We are seeing more and more an inclination to bring legal action in different places. The established media continues to toe the line. There's enough in social media. There are enough young people who are outraged. There are enough people of conscience, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, who are challenging their own religious leadership to do something. I think the challenge is to organize this feeling into effective political action.
Right.
And you don't do that by just having a big demonstration. Everybody demonstrates and then they go home, and that's the end of it. What's more important than the demonstration is the organization that led to the demonstration. Preparing lists and email addresses and small committees and groups that coordinate together, so that yes, the demonstration is important, but it's important to illustrate the amount of organization that took place and that continues to exist after the demonstration is there.
It's my guest this week on Palestinian Stories, Jonathan Kuttab, who's an internationally recognized Palestinian human rights attorney, licensed to practice in the U.S., Palestine, and Israel, and currently splits his time between East Jerusalem and the East Coast of the U.S. I'm Tim Hartman, your host, excited to talk to Jonathan this week. He's dedicated his life to the liberation of all people within Palestine's borders. He's grounded his legal and personal work in a deeply spiritual ethic of compassion, nonviolence, and universal justice, which is rooted in his Christian faith and inspired by the teachings of great spiritual leaders across wisdom traditions. Currently, you're the executive director of Friends of Sabeel North America, FOSNA. You're a co-founder of Al-Haq, one of the most respected Palestinian human rights organizations, and also Nonviolence International. Are you still involved with them, Nonviolence International?
I am.
And then you're a founding director of Just Peace Advocates, which is a Canadian nonprofit.
Yes.
Focused on international law and justice. How do you find time for all of that?
Well, you know what they say, if you want something done, give it to a busy person.
I guess so. And I mean, you've never been more busy than right now, I would imagine.
That's true.
How is life for you right now? How you feeling? You feeling overwhelmed, optimistic, pessimistic? How do you feel?
Not optimistic, but certainly full of hope.
Okay.
As a spiritual quality, hope is different from optimism.
Explain that a little bit. What do you mean by that?
Optimistic means you think that if the right party wins, or if this happens, or if that happens, then things will be okay. That's optimism, where you look at the situation and say, yeah, it's going to get better. Don't worry. Just all you need is to do the X, Y, or Z. Hope is in the face of an impossible situation, It's faith that God, history, fate, the nature of the world is such that this evil cannot persist and
Right.
that things will change. If you're a Christian, you would say, I believe in the sovereignty of God. He's ultimately in control, and things will get better. And we're just doing our job. It doesn't depend on us, it depends on God ultimately. We don't have the option of giving up because God is in control, and all we have to do is just do our job. We're not being called to achieve great things, we're being called to obedience and being faithful to our mission.
I actually came from the Christian church, but I converted to Islam, and I still have
Mm.
great respect for all the faiths. In fact, I have more
Well,
respect for Christianity because of that.
Allahu Akbar. God is greater than Tel Aviv and greater than
That's correct.
Washington and greater
That's correct.
than, all these
Hmm.
powerful people who seem to think that they're in control of everything. No. Allahu Akbar. God is greater. It's Allahu Akbar. He's greater than.
So whatever you think you're seeing right now, there's still a greater plan than what you're seeing.
Yeah.
So to me, that's a form of optimism.
For a Christian, anyway, it's that we are citizens of the kingdom of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
That our life here on this earth is always secondary to our citizenship in the kingdom of God. That we owe God full allegiance and everybody else secondary allegiance. That we can, that if you give any country or ideology or party or government total allegiance, that's idolatry. You're making
100%.
them into an idol, and that is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
God is the one who is sovereign, and your commitment is always to Him, and your presence on this earth is a good presence. You're supposed to be the salt of the earth. You're supposed to make things better, and you're supposed to point people to a better system, a better reality, live as values of the kingdom of God. That's what you're required to do.
If you're preaching a path of love and compassion, it doesn't matter to me which path you're following.
I find that the more spiritual people in every religion are less dogmatic
Right.
than the people who are very superficial, who,
Right.
who grab onto their identity that Islam is better and my path is
No.
better, and
No.
you persecute everybody else. But the deeper, the more pious, the more spiritual people in every religion are more tolerant and more open and more willing to see God in everybody.
Or are you following the path, like you said? You following the ideology, or are you following God?
Yeah, this is. I think you find that in many religions,
Mm-hmm.
the path to God, the total commitment to the Almighty,
All right.
and the humility of saying, this is the light that I have. This is how I best understand things, but I am not going to say that I own truth and everybody else is, the
Right.
Quaker who said, I think everybody is wrong except for me and thou, and sometimes I think I have questions about thou.
You're right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like if God is bigger than we can imagine, every tradition teaches that, then why are you trying to box God in? Couldn't God speak in different languages? Couldn't God
Yeah, yeah.
look different ways to different people? Of course. Of course. But the common threads are there, the love and the compassion. I can see too from looking at your writings and your actions over the years, you've had a bit of a mental evolution that's shown throughout your career. And the types of legal work you've been involved in or you believe to be effective, that's been influenced, of course, by events on the grounds. There was a particular transformation, I think, after 1967. But could you give a bit of a background to that? How that kind of
Well,
progressed for you?
well, it's actually quite simple because I grew up in a very conservative family, and I used to think of politics as being evil, worldly. You don't want to get involved in politics. You have to concentrate on spiritual life and saving souls and eternal life and all these good things. And politics actually forced itself on me. My very existence as a non-Jew in a land that Zionism teaches only belongs to Jews. So, even if I have nothing to do with politics, my very life is a political factor that is viewed as as an insult, as a blasphemy against God's purposes. Why are you
Right.
here? Why do you exist? So I could be going around my path wanting nothing to do with politics, and the soldier stops me and treats me as an enemy, as an insult, as a threat, as an existential threat, because I'm not Jewish. So that's a political reality that I cannot escape from, even though I want to escape from it. I don't want to be involved in political life, but politics forces itself upon me. And then I have to say, okay, if I am necessarily involved in politics, what is my involvement? Is it a good involvement? Is it a bad involvement? Is it a partisan involvement? Is it a violent involvement or a non-violent one? Is it one that builds the humanity of everybody, including my enemy? Or is it one that is just hostile and destructive, and I want to get rid of my enemy because they are so evil and so nasty and so wrong, that I make that my goal, and then I start making all sorts of compromise in order to succeed in my battle against that enemy, and before long I become just as bad as my enemy. I'm using violence. I'm torturing my opponents. I'm killing and destroying the others. I am permitting myself to do things that are totally unethical because I think my goal is good, because I think my cause is just. That's the danger, I think, of the political involvement that I try to avoid constantly. Because I am involved in, let's say, Palestinian nationalism, it does not mean I have the permission to violate the lives of others and their dignity and their humanity, just because my cause is just.
Well, even Palestinians in general. It's not that they want the eradication of anyone. They want people to live together in peace and be accepting of one another. It's not about about eliminating the opponent. It's more about getting to a place where
that's what the other side, projects. When
right.
I say free Palestine, I don't mean kill the Jews.
Of course not.
Let us be free and live together. When I say from the river to the sea, I'm saying I want justice from the river to the sea, not justice in a little West Bank and oppression and racism and apartheid in the rest of Palestine. I want all of Palestine to be free, not free of Jews, but free of racism, free of discrimination, free of injustice, free. When people call intifada, why is intifada a bad word? Intifada means we're shaking off the oppression against us. And the first intifada was very nonviolent. And BDS, boycotts, divestments, and sanctions, are really nonviolent tools for carrying out our struggle for justice. And I says, oh, if you use the word free Palestine, if you use the word from the river to the sea, you are making me feel uncomfortable. Well, maybe you should feel uncomfortable because it is a challenge to your racist, discriminatory, supremacist ideology and behavior. You should feel uncomfortable. And yes, we do need a radical change.
Yeah.
And yes, the state of Israel as it exists today is a problem. And it's a problem for Jews as much as for Palestinians, because it calls for racism, because it calls for Jewish supremacy, because it calls for Jewish domination, because it pretends to speak for all Jews, while at the same time undermining Jewish values and Jewish faith and Jewish morality, I think.
Has that principle of nonviolence always been a part of your church from your youngest age?
It has, and people don't know this, but the majority of Palestinian Christians from all denominations are pacifists.
Mhm.
They understand the teaching of Christ. He's the Prince of Peace. He calls us to love our enemies, not to kill them. The fact that the majority of Christians elsewhere, at least except for the initial church, the first church, since the time of Constantine, Christians have found all sorts of excuses to participate in warfare in order to obey their leaders, for self-defense, the just war theory, to oppose evil forces. So they've always found an excuse as Christians to be involved in killing and in fighting. But Jesus' teachings were the opposite. And many Muslim friends come to me and says, we don't understand this. We understand that Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He taught peace. Well, why are all these Christians so violent? From the
Amen.
Crusades to the modern American and the European structure, colonialism, and then they're fighting. They're killing. They're bombing. They dropped an atomic bomb. Are these people Christians? And I have to tell them, no, they're not following the teachings of Christ. Christ did not teach us to destroy and to kill our enemies. He taught us to love them, to try and change them, to try and find a way towards coexistence and peace. He is the Prince of Peace. He teaches. So this is not new to me since I was young. And it's not because of the particular denomination that I am affiliated with. The majority of Palestinian Christians today are pacifists. That's how they read the Bible and the teachings of Jesus Christ. And those who are not, especially in the West, they have to reach back to the Old Testament, and they have to reach back to principles that the Jews themselves have moved beyond. The teaching of Amalek, for example,
Yes.
the commandment of genocide, that you have to kill a whole tribe, men, women, children, even animals. Most Jewish rabbis over the ages have said that commandment is no longer operative because we no longer know who is Amalek. But in Israel today, that principle, the idea of Amalek, is being used, is being quoted even by non-religious Jews like Netanyahu. He says the Bible teaches us how to deal with them. They are Amalek. They need to be destroyed. There are no innocents in Gaza. We have to kill them all, men, women, and children. There are no innocents. One of them says, even the babies, they grow up to be Arab,
Wow.
as if Arab itself is this evil category that needs to be annihilated and totally destroyed. Yes, for me, the Christian nationalists in this country, especially, are so far from the teachings of Christ. It's really sad.
Well, that's how I grew up, actually, was in a Christian nationalist home in the Mennonite church. There's two very distinct sides to the Mennonite church, which actually fascinates me now looking back. But there's the more nationalist or Christian Zionist side. And then there's the side that's very much pacifist and more liberation theology minded, but that way of growing up really did a number to me as far as trauma, and then caused me to investigate this entire situation later, which kind of turned me against my own faith for a while until I discovered another path that embraced all the faiths.
Mennonites have been one of the few Christian denominations that continue to uphold nonviolence and pacifism, although they've been quite passive until recently. These days, with Mennonite Action, for example,
That's a different story. Yeah, that's
a lot of young people who are saying, as Mennonites, we have to be at the forefront of those who call for justice, call for a ceasefire, call for an end to the ongoing genocide, because that is our Mennonite roots.
Mhm.
Yeah, I hear you because I went to a to Messiah College, now Messiah University,
Right.
which is very close to the Mennonites. It's Brethren in Christ is one of the historic peace churches, and they're very clear about these things. They believe in nonviolence and pacifism.
Fosnet, for example, on the front page of its website,
Yeah,
talks about liberation theology as a founding principle.
correct.
But, the different versions I've heard of liberation theology have been interpreted differently too. And this kind of ties into nonviolence a little bit. What about nonviolence in the form of resistance? Like, I have to ask a pointed question about what do you tell people in Gaza to do at this moment? What do you tell them to do? Do they lay down and die? Or what are they supposed to do? Is there a way to
It's.
resist? How do they resist?
I think there is, but I think they need us on the outside to help them. They are too weak on their own to actually resist violently or non-violently, and they have tried non-violence with the Great March of Return, and they continue to act non-violently. But even violently or non-violently, it's not enough. They need us. I used to say during the Holocaust, many Jews were asking, "Where is God? Where is God?" And many of them lost their faith. Why is God allowing this to happen? Uh, Today, the people of Gaza are not saying, "Where is God?" They are saying, "Where are God's people?
Right.
Where are the Muslims of this world? Where are the Christians of this world? Where are the decent people of this world? Where are the institutions? Where are the beliefs? Where are the values when they see a genocide taking place before their eyes
Mm.
daily, continuously, openly, using genocidal language freely, talking openly about cutting off food, cutting off what they call is humanitarian aid. We want to cut off humanitarian aid. When they say there are no innocents, when they say we want to use food as a weapon to starve them into submission or into leaving the country. So yeah, people in Gaza, I feel I don't know what to say to or about people in Gaza. The horror of an ongoing genocide. You know, I try to explain this to Americans sometimes. I say, look, get your knee off my neck.
Really?
I can't breathe. Give me food. Let me, and then we can talk about justice and reconciliation and coexistence and any solution to the Palestinian problem. But right now, just let me live. Let me breathe. I can't breathe. Open up Gaza. Allow food in. Allow medicine in. Allow hygienic supplies in. Allow, you know, just the basics. Allow us to live. And then we can talk about what kind of life it is and what kind of relationship we have and whether, coexistence and justice and all these things. But right now, the main task is survival.
Yeah, I talked to a friend of mine who we've been sending money to from various groups there just to support our family. And she asked me a question the other day. She said, "Who do you think is having the greater test right now, us or you?" And I said, physically, I'd like to say you, but I actually think it's probably on the outside. And she said, "That's 100% how I think, because I feel like I'm already dead or that my day is coming soon.
Yeah.
And I know I'm going to be shaheed, which is martyr in Islam, which means that you're going to heaven immediately. But those of us on the outside, maybe not the case, depending on what we're doing or not doing." So that ties into what you're talking about. I mean, if there's going to be nonviolence, it's got to be from us, blocking the weapons, working to get humanitarian aid in. But how do we do that with a power structure like this, which kind of ties into a question I wanted to ask you too about international law and your thoughts on that? Because theoretically, international law says none of this should be happening, of course.
Correct.
But what is the law And how
See,
is there a possibility of applying that in some way that's
the
realistic?
law is clear. There is, a requirement. There is an obligation on countries to put an end to this injustice, to these war crimes and to these crimes against humanity and to this oppression. Now, you can talk about the United Nations, but there's a US veto. But people don't talk enough about the obligation of states. There is an obligation to ensure compliance with international law. Article 1 of the Geneva Conventions, for example, each of the high contracting party has a duty to ensure compliance. Now, if the government doesn't do enough, and they don't, then there's an obligation on ordinary citizens. This is where actually BDS comes in. Boycotts, divestments, and sanctions. Because every country has the ability, through universal jurisdiction, to bring those criminals to trial and to justice. Already countries like, for example, Australia and New Zealand. Any Israeli who comes into these countries have to fill out a questionnaire and to be asked, did you serve in the IDF? Where did you serve? In what function? What did you carry out? Did you serve in Gaza? Did you serve in the West Bank? Did you commit crimes yourself? We want to know before we let you into our country whether you're a war criminal or not. So countries have an obligation, ordinary people have an obligation to pressure their countries to do the right thing. When the flotilla, that one boat tried to get into Gaza, that should be followed by thousands of boats coming into Gaza to break the siege, non-violently. We're not asking you to send bombs and weapons and guns and to help us. We're asking you to send food and to force that food in. Israel is too small a country to live on its own. It needs the rest of the world. It needs Europe in particular. It needs the United States, of course, as well, to even survive. Culturally, economically, educational institutions, art, science, at every level, we are an interconnected world. And we need to bring that pressure to bear, non-violently. We need to shame both the Israelis and shame our own governments, our own countries, our own legislators, our own churches, our own mosques, our own temples, our own synagogues. They need to be challenged and challenged forcefully, including, if necessary, civil disobedience. We need to disrupt a world that is silent. We need to wake it into action.
You remember, of course, what happened in South Africa. And I would imagine you remember a lot of the details, as it progressed, ending apartheid.
Yes.
How would you compare that situation to this, in the light of there's hope and maybe a model for what people could follow?
Very much so. Sports are an excellent example. We have FIFA coming up. I think the average Israeli is more worried about being kicked out of FIFA than about all the pressure that BDS can place on them. I think every time an Israeli soccer team shows up anywhere in the world, they should be confronted. They should be boycotted. They should be shamed. They should be challenged. How dare you? And this is a nonviolent action. This is a nonviolent action. Shame them. Boycott them. Shun them. That's by the way, that's what the word intifada comes from. Because Jesus told his disciples, you go to a city and if they don't listen to you, leave that city and shake off the dust from your feet. Intifada. Forget it. You don't belong. You are so far out. We don't want to have any relation with you. We don't want to deal with you. And by the way, this has nothing to do with anti-Semitism, because that's how they say, oh, you're doing it because we're Jewish. No, I find our Jewish allies like JVP and Not in Our Name and other groups like that, I find them to be much better allies to us than many of our Arab and Muslim friends who fail to carry out their duties and their obligations and their religious obligations and human obligations towards the Palestinian people.
Well, it's precisely because of identity and not wanting to be associated with it. I think that's why I'm so passionate about it myself, because of the way I was raised. But all the protests, I've only been to a couple in America because I've been elsewhere, but they've all been led by JVP.
Absolutely,
You know?
absolutely, and thank God for these people,
Yeah.
because they help us and they help themselves,
Right.
because they give the lie to the idea that Israel and Zionism speaks for Jews. It doesn't.
No.
It speaks for Zionism. It speaks for colonialism. It speaks for oppression. It speaks for Jewish supremacy, for right-wing genocidal policies, not for Judaism or for Jews.
I've talked to a couple of different friends who are Jewish, and they kind of tried to conflate the two, that Zionism is Judaism. Yeah. Why are you identifying yourself with basically a military? I don't care if your military is Jewish, atheist, Buddhist, Muslim. I don't care what it is. I object to what they're doing. It has nothing to do with your identity. When do we get to look at the people that are suffering under what they're doing?
The Zionist movement, and we have to understand that a lot of it came from the trauma of being discriminated against and being they call it anti-Semitism. I don't like that word because we are Semites, but the anti-Jewish bigotry in the Western world, and Zionism says the answer is to Jewish supremacy, to have our own state where we are supreme and dominant over others, and where we use power, blood, and iron to ensure that this is never again happens to us. And that is one answer, and I think it's the wrong answer. The wrong answer is humanity. Never again will we allow this to happen to anybody. Racism itself is wrong. Discrimination itself is wrong. Not only wrong but when it's used against us, but when it's used against anybody. So, actually one Jewish writer actually said, after the Holocaust, there's only two kinds of Jews that remained. Those who say that never again will we allow this to happen to us. We will break every rule. We will destroy every person. We will build a huge fortress. We will ensure that never again will this happen to the Jews. And the other kind of Jew are those who say, never again will we allow this to happen to anybody. So we have to strengthen international law, strengthen international institutions, stand up to defend any minority, any vulnerable person, stand up against all forms of hate, demand equality, demand equal rights. We have to be at the forefront of preventing any kind of genocide happening again. Not to commit it ourselves, but we have to say never again will we allow this to happen to anybody. And they are. I mean, Jews have been at the forefront of an international respect for human rights and human dignity.
I mean, one of your ways of showing nonviolence resistance and nonviolent action was decades ago in an organization that's still going, of course, and doing great work, called Al-Haq, which is the human rights organization based in Ramallah. What specifically inspired that? I know you were friends with co-founder Raja Shahade, but can you talk a little bit about the founding of Al-Haq and what its mission is and what it does today?
Well, it had really basically two principles. One is the rule of law, respect for human rights and international law, and also there was an almost naive belief that if facts were known, if we document them carefully, if we show and analyze how military rules are being used to oppress people, that if the facts become known, somehow that will alleviate the situation. That much of the oppression of the Palestinians came out of ignorance. People didn't know the facts. Decent people throughout the world supported the state of Israel because they thought they were the good guys. They were the persecuted guys. They were the guys who wanted peace. They were the guys who just wanted to survive. They were the victims of oppression in many different countries. And they were trying to be the best that they can under very difficult circumstances. So a lot of the work of Al-Haq initially was documentation. We wanted clear, unquestioned documentation that what was happening was illegal, oppressive, unjust. And we felt that if we can bring those facts to the attention of the world, that would be enough. That the world itself will stand and do the right thing, that Jews and even Israelis will stand up and do the right thing, by challenging the falsehoods that were being perpetuated, by showing the way that law itself was being manipulated to allow the theft of Palestinian land, for example, the population control over Palestinians, denial of basic rights. We felt that by showing these things, that there would be enough.
Mm.
In fact, it wasn't, because we've never had as much clarity, as much documentation as there exists now. This is the most well-documented genocide in history, the most well-documented apartheid in history, the most well-documented daily massacres, violations of basic rights in history. And yet that somehow didn't bring about what we expected. So now we've shifted a lot of our attention to trying to bring legal action before the ICC, before the ICJ, before national tribunals. We still, some people say naively, believe in international law,
Right.
and international institutions. The human race cannot live under the law of the jungle. Whoever is powerful can do whatever they want. They can attack anybody and claim preemptive self-defense, because sometime in the future you may consider attacking us or defending yourselves against us. We can go into Syria, for example. Syria is the best example. Syria, there's a new regime that shows zero hostility towards Israel. They say, this is a wonderful opportunity. We'll go and destroy their navy, destroy their air force, move in and build bases and additional bases in their territory, so that they won't even dream in the future of ever whatever. The attacks on Iran had nothing to do with Iran attacking Israel. This was Israel saying, we want to make sure that Iran will never have a weapon in the future that may threaten, not us, threaten our monopoly, threaten our domination, create a balance, mutual assured destruction. Mad.
It is mad.
It is mad. But if you think, and if the U.S. think, well, the U.S. is attacking Iran when there is no basis, there is no imminent threat, there is no challenge to the U.S., they go and attack Iran. That's the crime of aggression, pure and simple.
There needs to be international law, but behind that too, there needs to be enforcement of
Correct.
international law. So a lot of people go immediately to, well, it's he who carries the biggest gun is going to be the enforcement. But really, though, I know, but that's what we hear from people. If you dismantle that system, though, if you take it down, if you stop the system where arms brings profits, it's a more complex route to get there, but that's how you abide by the nonviolent principles. So how does that look, though? What actions should people do? What can they
Well, I would even go one step further and say for Israel and Israelis themselves, the collapse of international law is going to be a huge tragedy, because there will come a time when the balance of power will change. There will come a time when the umbrella of protection that the U.S. is giving them, this bubble that they have created, will burst. When the interest of the United States, the selfish interest of the United States, the top 1% that they are relying on, when they decide it's no longer in our interest, and they'll throw them under the bus, that's when they will desperately need international law. In this country, there can be a lot of anti-Jewish sentiments that will be stirred up. And when Jews in this country will need protection from the Christian nationalists who are supporting them these days, who will defend them? What laws will exist? What institutions will exist? What values will exist to say you cannot attack Jews? This is discrimination. This is racism. This is unfair. Right now, it's the Muslims who are the butt of all these attacks. But if you weaken the protections in the Constitution, in the law, in the freedom of expression, if you weaken those protections now, I think Jews themselves will suffer, because there will come a very nasty backlash against them.
You're starting to see some of those cracks already. It's interesting watching some of the conversations that are happening on the right in America.
Yeah.
I never thought I'd see the day where certain elements of even the MAGA base are questioning what's going on. Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens.
I'm not surprised at all, and I'm not surprised about real, genuine anti-Jewish hatred flaring up in this country.
Yeah, there's some of that too, and that needs to be separated. Yeah.
Awful. And Zionism loves to conflate the two. They always say, we want to pass this legislation against hate speech and against discrimination and against anti-Zionism. They slip in anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And a lot of progressives fall in for that trap. Yes, we're against anti-Semitism. Yes, we're against bigotry. Yes, we're against racism. And then they slip in also anti-Israeli as being part of that mix. They try to pass this IHRA definition of anti-Semitism that blatantly conflates the two. Conflates anti-Semitism with anti-Israeli or anti-Zionist activity and beliefs, and criminalizes anti-Israeli activity.
What's the solution to that? What advice would you give to people?
It is very clear. Even though I'm a religious person, I think the answer is a secular answer that accepts equality, that demands and prohibits discrimination against everybody, that protects minorities everywhere, that protects freedom of speech, even if you don't like what is being spoken, that protects the right of people to boycott, to make their voices heard, that protects people and principles rather than protects governments and oppressive structures. This, to me, is clearly the answer. We all need that protection. All minorities and all individuals need freedom and protection from the oppressiveness of the majority or the popular views or the powerful views at any particular time in history.
Are more people waking up? Is this going to end in a positive way? It's going to get darker before it gets better? What are we looking at specifically with Gaza and the current situation? What do you think?
I think what's happening is so horrible. It must create a reaction.
It is.
But it is. And I think that reaction will come. I think we have seen it. We have seen millions of people march throughout Europe. We are seeing more and more an inclination to bring legal action in different places. We are seeing a lot of people moving against their own countries, demanding action. I think even though the established media continues to toe the line, there's enough in social media, there's enough information that's coming out, there are enough young people who are outraged, there are enough people of conscience, Jews, Christians, and Muslims, who are challenging their own religious leadership to do something. It has to be done. This is too horrible to continue.
You know, even like the awareness of colonialism and the history of not only what's happening in Israel, Palestine, but different countries, including the U.S., and tying all that together over the past few years, I think is bringing people together.
I think the challenge is to organize this feeling into effective political action.
Right.
And you don't do that by just having a big demonstration. That is like everybody demonstrates and then they go home and that's the end of it. What's more important than the demonstration is the organization that led to the demonstration. Preparing lists and email addresses and small committees and groups that coordinate together so that, yes, the demonstration is important, but it's important to illustrate the amount of organization that took place and that continues to exist after the demonstration is there, so that politicians will know that there will be a cost, there will be a price to be paid, so that people are named and shamed continuously, not just in 4 years when we have the next election, but right now. In Philadelphia, there's a group that's called Fridays at Fetterman's that every week demonstrates against Fetterman, one senator, a horrible person
That
who I
he's
voted for initially.
I did
thinking
too.
he was
Yeah.
a progressive person.
Yeah.
And who has been an absolutely horrible proponent of genocide and a defendant of Israel and an opponent of ceasefire. They've been going every single week. I think it's now 84 weeks. Every single week.
I didn't know it was going that long. I heard about it at first, but that's great. I didn't know that.
And it's having a toll on his mental health. It is. They're driving him crazy.
Yeah.
And I think we should be doing that to many more of our politicians. And I think, we should challenge them in their churches, in their mosques, in their synagogues. What are you doing? I mean, a synagogue that has an Israeli flag and we stand with Israel outside it needs to be confronted. What about the teachings of Judaism? Why are you doing this? How dare you show your face in polite company after what you do and what you're supporting?
I'm inspired too by, I'd have to look at stats, but 80 to 90% of college students are against this. And if you look at the history of the past, like the Vietnam War, South Africa, that is how change happens. Well, Jonathan, I think I've taken enough of your time. I appreciate it.
And thank you very much for everything you're doing. And thanks to all your listeners. And I hope that this inspires them to actually do something and to think out of the box and to be willing to dare to do something. The horrible genocide has to stop.
And there's great organizations in every tradition. Whether you're religious or not, they're out there.
The plug to FOSNA, FOSNA.org. If you want to be on our newsletter, I give a reflection every week on the current situation. So if you check up our website or get on our mailing list, FOSNA.org. fosna.org.
And I know you also do a lot of public speaking too, so I'd imagine you'd
I
be
do.
open to that. Yeah.
I do.
Okay.
I do.
All right,
Thank you.
Jonathan. Thank you very much.